was the son of whom? Hagar. Who was Hagar? The slave of Sarah. So they consider themselves servants in a similar sense. Who is Isaac? The son of whom? Sarah. And Sarah was whom? The wife of him. So, not a servant child, his own child. You see the difference? And Christianity and Judaism comes from the line of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Islam looks at their lineage to Abraham through Ishmael, his firstborn, but firstborn through a servant girl. Interestingly enough, an Egyptian servant girl. Hagar was Egyptian. So it's interesting, the Egyptians were slaves to Abraham, the Jews became slaves to the Egyptians. Kind of a reverse there. Interesting. Just say. Okay? So, it's interesting that Muslims and Jews look to Abraham as their father, as well they should, but through the different routes. And to bring back what I want to plug this in here. There we go. Since we are getting close to the end of this study, if you want to begin preparing for the next, I would strongly recommend you ordering this commentary for the book of Genesis, because we're going to be in the book of Genesis for quite a while. And even though it's a Bible overview, why should I buy one book? Shouldn't I get an overview? First of all, the Old Testament in the Ignatius Catholic Bible Study series is not out yet, and probably won't be for at least another year. And I've been waiting with bated breath for Scott Hahn and Curtis Mitch to finally finish this series so we could have the entire Old Testament as well as the New Testament commentary of this caliber. Right now there are certain individual books like these from the Old Testament that we can get singly or in a small group. Genesis is one of them. If you really want to come to the head of the class students, I would get Genesis and Exodus as well, because those two books of the Bible, the first two books of the Bible, have a hinge for all of the rest of the Bible to fall on. Everything else in Scripture falls on creation, fall, redemption. Creation, fall, redemption. The story of Exodus is the same way. They sin, they go into exile, they come back, they're redeemed, and they go into the promised land. Once they're in the promised land, that whole cycle repeats itself through the book of Joshua and Judges. You see the same thing through 1st and 2nd Kings. Good kings, bad kings, good kings, bad kings. You know, this cycle of sin and redemption keeps coming back. And it all begins with Genesis and Exodus. So the commentary and the theological succinctness that this commentary has, I would say, is second to none. So again, if you want to be ahead of the class, pre-order this now, because in a few weeks, this is where we're going to be staying for several weeks thereafter. Okay? Because we're going to go through the creation story, the fall, the flood, the tower, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Joseph. That's the entire book of Genesis right there in summary. If you know that, you know the entire book of Genesis, really. And the commentary in here is the best that I know of for readability, succinctness, and a condensation of good Catholic theology. If you want something more theological, introduction to the Old Testament. No, where is it? Ah, this one. This is just fresh off of the press, only a year old. A Catholic commentary to the Bible, the Old Testament, Professors John Bergsma and Brant Petrie, both of whom were my professors online at John Paul the Great Catholic University. They shared with the students their preliminary PDF of this so that we could use the research in our studies. Absolutely, by far, the best synthesis of Catholic, historical, and modern exegesis, as well as scientific and archaeological research. I know of no other better book on the Old Testament as far as an introduction than this. As far as Catholic...
What's the name again? John, the authors?
The author are John Bergsma and Brant Petrie. It comes out through Ignatius Press. It's hard. You would want to get the hardcover book. It's $40. It's quite a tome. It's, I want to say it's over 700 pages long, but let me just check. It's got rave reviews. Robert Barron gave a review of this. You know who he is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, 1,060 pages. It's the entire Old Testament surveyed. I know of no better book than this. These are the authors. And hold on here. I know how to blow this up.
Okay.
There they are. Those are the authors. Bergsma and Brant Petrie. Like I said, I know both of these gentlemen. They used to be my professors. Absolutely excellent. John Bergsma is a convert from Presbyterianism, and Brant Petrie is a cradle Catholic. Both excellent theologians in their own right.
Are they priests or?
No, they're laymen. Both are married. Yes. Petrie, yes. Okay? So if you want to go into depth about the Old Testament, if you want to get the best of modern and historic, classic, Catholic, theological synthesis, this is probably the best introduction I know of. Okay? So get the Genesis commentary. It'll be just like this, except in a nice pretty blue. I would also get Exodus, but if you want your own personal depth, I would get this book. Okay? Because Robert Barron, Auxiliary Bishop of the Archdiocese of Los Angeles, likes it. So if the bishop likes it, that's good enough for me. But even if he didn't like it, I would still like it because I know what these guys are like. And for the price, $40 for a 1,000-page tome, that's really quite good. And you would want it in hardcover for your library. It's not something you're going to pick up and read just to, unless you want to fall asleep. It's more of a reference, but it introduces every single book of the Old Testament. Gives you the historic background, gives you the author, date, purpose, the time period, all of that stuff. Where did it come from? Why is it in the canon? And in particular, they spend a good amount of time over the first 5 books of the Bible. which is called the Torah, otherwise known as the law. That's Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. The most revered books of the Old Testament to Jews. They were the most revered and the oldest books of our Bible. Okay? And they spend quite a bit of time over where did they come from? Who authored them? How do we get them the way that we are? I mean, very I don't want to say timeless, but I mean, these are the questions that theologians have been wrangling about and have been studying and pondering about for centuries, if not millennium. I mean, for thousands of years. And these two men have synthesized the best of, like I said, historic Catholic theology and study, as well as modern historical criticisms. And they give good responses to them all. So it's a very balanced approach, I'd have to say. Okay? So, yes. And like I said, it's only been out a little more than a year. When I was in JP Catholic, this book had not been out yet. So like I said, we got an advanced copy to use. And I was very impressed with the scholarship myself. It's readability, it's not highfalutin, we don't use a lot of big words, but they synthesize archaeological understandings, textual criticism, historical research, etc., the Dead Sea Scrolls, all that kind of stuff. Okay, so it's well worth the money. Okay, and like I said, since we are going to be in the Old Testament for quite a while, it'd be a good reference to go back to research. Okay? So I'm not sure how I got off on that, but there we are. Free, no extra charge. We were talking about this rung to heaven, this ladder to heaven, and this is how we climb it. So this is something in which you can incorporate hopefully into your own spiritual life. If you really want to get into the scriptures and have them speak back to you, the whole purpose of Lectio Divina is not to become a theologian. The purpose of Lectio Divina is to pray the scriptures back to God for a change. Change of what? A change of heart and mind. Watch the scriptures transform your lives. And like I said, I try to do this when I can in front of the Blessed Sacrament, exposed. Because that's Jesus speaking directly to me. You hear what I'm saying? So that, if you can, great. If you can't, do it anyway. You know what I mean? Do it wherever. This is one of the oldest devotions, if you will, that the church has, of praying the scriptures. You do this in a very minor way when you pray your rosary, by the way. The rosary was developed over time as a means for everyday people to do what the monks were doing in their monasteries. It's a way to kind of get in on the deal. Because you could walk from town to town and pray your Hail Marys and your Our Fathers. In the beginning, the beads were called paternosters, which means Our Fathers. You would just pray a continuous Our Father. And they used to be in bands of 10. You would pray 10 Our Fathers up and 10 Our Fathers down. Over time, the paternoster was changed because the Our Father is somewhat long. So and in light of the controversies about Jesus' divinity, the church developed a devotion to the Blessed Mother. And along with it, a prayer to affirm the divinity of Christ, her glorious motherhood, and to make the paternosters a little less cumbersome. And that prayer was the Hail Mary, which is composed of 2 stanzas from Scripture. The first part, Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. That comes from the reading that we did. You remember that? The Annunciation. The second stanza comes from the Visitation. Elizabeth said, "Blessed are you among women, and blessed is the fruit of your womb." Jesus. The second half of that prayer was composed by the church. Holy Mary, Mother of God. If we were praying that in Greek, we would say Theotokos. That was the official word to describe Mary's divine motherhood against heretics who believed that she didn't give birth to God. She only gave birth to the human part of Jesus. The church said no. She gave birth to fully God, fully man. So we describe her as Theotokos. That is the theological word that came around the 4th century. Theotokos, which means God bearer. She bore God. She carried God in her womb. Not human only, fully God as well as man. From the moment of conception until forever, he was fully God and fully man, never ceased being either at any point in his life. You understand that? There were heretics, many of them exist today, that believe either Jesus wasn't fully human or wasn't fully divine, or he was a human, but the divineness came on him. They usually say this came at him during his baptism.